Anyway, here we are. So, a day in the life of Bomber Command. A typical bomber station would consist of about 2,000 personnel. It would be a massive site, usually cost in a region of about £1.6 million their money to build, take about 18 months, and it was built by names you'd know today, like Langs, McAlpines, all built to a standard pattern. All buildings would have a particular design, and they could just say, we want those there, and those there. The key thing is that the accommodation areas were kept away from the operational areas for obvious reasons. Bombing, they would expect them to bomb the operational areas so that the accommodation should be safer. And this is what an airfield looks like. This is a typical Bomber Command layout. We've got 3 runways. We have a main runway, which consists of being about 2,000 feet long, and 2 auxiliary runways of 1,200 feet each. Now the reason for this, you can see it's a triangle of runways. Aircraft take off and land into wind. Lancasters, Halifaxes, very big wingspan. Lancaster wingspan is 102 feet, so it's very susceptible to crosswinds. That's why sometimes you won't see the Battle of Britain Memorial flight come and display, and you think, well, it's beautiful weather, why isn't it here? Because they can't get it off the runway. Unfortunately, modern airfields are built for jets, which don't worry too much about it, and we don't have anything really going towards that sort of a wingspan. So consequently, poor old Coningsby, where it's based, just has the one runway, and if the wind's blowing in the wrong direction and it's a bit too hard, we don't get to see that Lancaster. But back then, they've got 3 choices. So this is the runway we're looking at here, 02220, and then we've got, to join all this together, a perimeter track. So the peri track goes all the way around like that, joining all the runways together. Off one of these peri tracks you'd have the bomb dump, usually in a wooded area somewhere concealed, that would be off there. And then off here we have, all around the airfield, what they call dispersals. And on each dispersal you can park 1 aeroplane. Now it's called dispersal because they've dispersed the aeroplane around the perimeters of the airfield, so that should one unfortunate bomber suffer a direct hit from a German bomb, the resulting explosion shouldn't destroy anything adjacent. So we've got to talk first of all about the forgotten heroes, and the forgotten heroes are the ground crew. The ground crew were magical on airfields. They did all the work you can imagine on the aircraft for a start. They would be doing things like your general maintenance, bombing up, fueling up. That had to be done every time there was an operation. They would be working out summer come winter. So in winter it could be -5 degrees. Airfields are windy places, as you well know, and of course rainy places sometimes. It doesn't matter if there's an operation on, they have to be out there working on those things at any time. But the other myth is that bombers come into hangars to be repaired if they've got battle damage or anything like that. Not true. If you look at this map, how many hangars can you actually see? 1, 2, 3. Only 3 hangars, so there's nowhere near enough hangars. And these are what they call type C hangars, which means you can only actually get 3 Lancasters in each hangar. So you can't get all those aircraft in there, so they have to do the repairs and maintenance out on the dispersals. That means that engine changes have to be done out on dispersals. And they can change an engine in wartime in 4 hours. Just 4 hours. So it could come back the night before, having had 2 engines in trouble, and be ready for an operation the following night. Outstanding. There was one exception, though, to work on the airfield. If it snowed, if the airfield was covered in snow, everybody got a shovel, including the aircrew. Everybody's out there shoveling on the runways, getting the the airfield operational as quickly as possible. So that's our airfield. So, amongst those forgotten heroes, the women. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAF. Separate organisation, okay? They did every single job that the guys did apart from one, and that was combat. It wasn't felt chivalrous to send a lady into combat, so they would do everything else. And they had some vital jobs. They'd be out on those dispersals, doing the maintenance on the aircraft. And I have to say, I'm not entirely sure I would mess with a woman wielding a spanner at -5 degrees. I really don't think I would. They also had another very important job, and one of these was parachute packing. That's a parachute there. And there's a true story of an aircrew member who used to get his parachute given to him by this lovely WAF, and he got the hots for her, to be honest. And he thought, I'm going to have a little joke with this lovely lady when I go and pick my parachute up. So off he went and he said, now listen here, darling, has this parachute been packed properly? And she had a little twinkle in her eye and she looked at him straight dead on in the eye and she said, she said, I tell you what, my sweetheart, if it doesn't work, you bring it back. And that was the kind of banter that the girls and the boys had back then, back in wartime. So, you're all going to be aircrew for me. We're going to turn to the guys who flew it. And when I say guys, I mean guys, because again, women can't go into combat, so it's all men. Let's talk about the Lancaster. From the front of the Lancaster, you've got 7 crew members on board. Sometimes there was 8 on special operations, but 7 normally. Bomb aimer is directly at the front. Just back from the bomb aimer, on the left-hand side is where the pilot sits. He's the boss. He's the boss of the aircraft, sits on the left-hand side. To his right, we have an onboard flight engineers. Heavy bombers have 4 of a lot of things, 4 engines, lots of things to think about, too much for the pilot. So to support him, we have a flight engineer to his right. Coming back from him, we have the Navigator. Now, the Navigator is in the largest area. He's got a lovely big table for his charts. He's got a curtain across the front to black out and a curtain across the back because he will have his light on all the time on his little table. So they black him out. So he's got a curtain at the front and a curtain at the back. And don't you find it ironic that the one guy who can't look out the aeroplane is the Navigator, the one who's going to try and tell you how to get there and back? It's because he uses a different system, a system called dead reckoning. It's all mathematics. He's a genius at mathematics. We'll come on to that a little bit later on. Behind him we have the wireless operator, and he's the poor crew member who has the least chance of survival. There are 2 escape hatches on the Lancaster. One is in the floor of the bomb aimer's position, so under the bomb aimer. The other is at the rear of the aircraft, the crew door. Unfortunately for wireless op, he's either got 4 crew members in front of him before he goes out the bomb aimer's hatch, or he's got to go all the way back down the aeroplane, down past the mid-upper turret, and out through that rear crew door. And sadly, he often didn't have time to do it. He'd be sat at his desk giving SOS, trying to give a position of where the aircraft is going down, and was so busy doing that, frankly being a hero, that he didn't have time to get out. And then we're going now to the coldest parts of the aircraft. That's where we've got the mid-upper gunner and the rear gunner. Now, how cold is it on an airfield? Well, we've talked about 5 degrees during winter on the ground. How cold is it in the air? Well, if it's 0 degrees centigrade at ground level, for every 1,000 feet you climb, you lose roughly 1 to 2 degrees centigrade. So it could be, if you're bombing at 20,000 feet, minus 40 degrees centigrade. It is perishingly cold up there. And remember that we've got an actual Halifax nose section here. Can you see how thin this Halifax is? Outside, inside. There is heating in a Lancaster. It's actually under the wireless operator's seat. The wireless operator would be nice and warm and toasty, in fact moaning about it. He wants it turned down a bit. And the air gunners are moaning at him slightly more vehemently, saying, turn it up please, because they're in the coldest parts. And of course you've got to sit in one of these things. This is a rear turret, an actual rear turret. Sit in one of those for, on average, 5.5 hours. We're talking a 5.5 hour trip. I'm doing a talk a little later called Life as a Rear Gunner, where we'll talk more about this and more about the kind of thing that poor rear gunner goes through. But what I want to tell you about is, how does he bail out? How does the rear gunner bail out? So he's wedged into this little cocoon. This is what he does. We're going to have to make a few assumptions first. Let's assume that the aircraft is flying straight level. It's not inverted, so it's not upside down. It's not being pulled in a 4G dive, so his arms and legs are 4 times heavier than they should be. That he's still got turret rotation, either manually or hydraulically or electrically, so he can still turn his turret. That he's not injured, that he's not got bullets in him and been injured by the attack that's come from the aircraft. That of course, the aircraft isn't on fire. And let's be honest, if it's being shot down, it's going down, the aircraft is going to be on fire. This is what he has to do. He has to rotate the turret to this position. He's sitting straight up the fuselage, so he has to rotate to the boarding position. He has to open his rear turret doors. Now, the problem he's got is that he's got an awful lot of gear on. He's got 3 pairs of socks, 3 pairs of gloves. He's got teddy suits, his uniform, his Mae West, his parachute harness. He's got no room, unfortunately, for his parachute in the turret. So he's got to go out the turret to retrieve his parachute. So he pulls himself out, grabs his parachute, brings it back in, and he clips it onto a harness which looks just like this. This is an observer's harness. Those two big clips you can see on the front there. Clips that little parachute onto there. Now what he has to do is pull himself forward, hunch himself in, and rotate that turret through 90 degrees. If that turret rotates 90 degrees, the back of it will either be facing this way or that way. Of course, before he does, if you've got fire on your starboard wing, and remember he's flying backwards, so the pilot's starboard is his port, so he has to look up there and think, oh, there's a lot of flames coming down there, I'll rotate that way. So make sure you're not rotating into flame. You then pull your head in, you lean back. I, at this point, would let my flying helmet, where it is, there's the flying helmet, I would take that off, I'd leave all that inside the turret, won't need that where I'm going, and you just roll out backwards. And now, as he's going, he hopes that he doesn't snag his legs, there's a jolt on the aeroplane, a bit of flak hits it again, and he gets stuck, and he's going down with the aeroplane, stuck to it, that as he falls, that his parachute's going to open properly. But talking of his parachute, if you notice, it's only the size of a reserve parachute of today. That's his actual parachute. He's never done a parachute jump, so the first time they bail out is the first time they do a parachute jump. Done a bit of training, bit of learning how to land properly, but has he clipped his parachute on the right way round? If he's right-handed and the parachute is clipped on that way, then naturally he wants to pull like this, but of course he's got to pull it and he's going to block the actual chute from opening and cause himself another problem. And if those parachute lines get twisted, well, it's going to descend very, very quickly. So you've got to remember all that. The rest of the crew said he had the easiest way out of the aeroplane. And the most frightening statistic of all is that for every Lancaster shot down, less than 2 crew members survived. And over 3,500 Lancasters were shot down out of 7,377. It's a frightening statistic. Now, what I want to do now is I want to take you all on a raid, okay? So you're all aircrew, remember ladies, you're blokes, okay? Just for the purposes of this exercise, you're fellas. You're bomb aimers, you're navigators, you're wireless operators. Now, if you're an air gunner, you've been in training for about 16 weeks after your square bashing. It's a bit quicker to train an air gunner. If you're a navigator or a pilot, you could have been training for 1 to 2 years, and you've possibly even been to Canada to finish your training because we can guarantee the weather a little bit out here, okay, rather than as we can in Britain. This is what your typical day will go like. You'll get up, you'll have a bit of breakfast, about 11 o'clock-ish, 11:30, the battle order will be posted on the wall. You'll go and check the battle order. Fantastic, your crew's name is on the battle order, so you've got the chance to now finally go and do what you've been trained to do. But of course, you're worried, you're frightened. Aircrew members have often said to me, any aircrew member who tells you he wasn't frightened is lying. You now know that, you know all the stories, you've heard what raids are like, but now it's your chance to go and do what you've been trained to do, and you're going to actually experience it for the first time. You'll get some lunch, and about mid-afternoon, there'll be a booming tannoy announcement over the intercom. All aircrew to flights, please, all aircrew to flights. At that point, you all go to the briefing room and have your briefing. Now, I'll turn these boards around a little bit so you can see them better. These are simulations of actual briefing boards. We know our airfield. Now, all these you can see are letters, so that's A Apple, B Baker, these are each individual aircraft, and you will be given a taxiing time, a time to take off, because they all got to taxi down that route individually. This is the actual briefing board here. That will be curtained off. In will come the briefing officer. Gentlemen, your target for tonight is... Oh dear, it's Berlin. There'll be a massive groan from the crews who've been before. We're in the middle of the Battle of Berlin, but notice that you're flying a dogleg route. You can see that you keep changing direction, but you'll also change altitude, because what they've done is, intelligence tells us that around Bremen, the flat can reach 12,000 feet. So you will climb here to 14,000 feet. In the theory, you can go over the top of the flat. So you change direction and you change altitude. Now, can everybody spot these very strange looking things here? What do you think that looks like? Window. and that's the window. Have you heard of window? It's aluminium foil, and it's fantastic if it's thrown out in clumps, and it's the poor bomb aimer whose job gets that, because he's not really doing anything until he gets to the target area. So the bomb aimer will throw out in big clumps, every aircraft dropping it out, this aluminium foil, and it causes a big whiteout on the Germans' radar, because the German had terrific radar. In fact, when we were using some specialist electronic equipment, we'd turn it on in the morning to test it. The Germans could detect our tests. So they would know that we're building up to a raid that night. Of course, they wouldn't necessarily know where that raid would be. Now, while the briefing officer is telling you all this, and telling you about it, giving you intelligence, all the telephone boxes nearby the station will be chained shut to make sure nobody can nip out. Now we know where the target is, and go and tell somebody, spies in the mist, so to speak. They'll go through all this briefing, and then they will turn to the actual operation board. Now, let me move this back a little. This is the operation board. So, target, Berlin, effort. How many bombers are going tonight? 959 bombers tonight. Maximum effort, as many as we can get serviceable. Now, H hour, that's your squadron's time over the target, okay? You're over the target at 23:45. Now, this is where those brilliant navigators come into their own. Because if we got 959 bombers all turning up over Berlin at 23:45, we're going to get collisions. There's going to be a bit of a disaster. So you go in waves. So each squadron gets a different briefing time. The Met man will have told you that at Bremen, you're going to be flying into a 10-knot headwind at, say, 14,000 feet. And as the Met man's giving you this information, you're laughing, you're joking, you're cheering, you're clapping, because you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, because the Met will have been done probably 6 to 8 hours prior to your raid. The weather will have changed. So when you thought you were going to be flying into a 10-knot headwind at Bremen, you actually got a 20-knot tailwind, so you're being blown faster towards the target. So your brilliant navigator, who's calculated on the original Met briefing that you fly at a certain speed, will get there at 23:45, now has to recalculate while you're flying to the target to slow you down, so that you're now going to ease off a bit to get there at 23:45. I asked crews sometimes who did they feel was the most important person on the aircraft, and many of them said the navigator. When I spoke to a navigator about this, he said, "Oh, rubbish," he said, "there's no I in team." They were a brilliant team and all did their bits and worked together. Now, we're in the era of pathfinding here. Now, the pathfinding force was brilliant. It was a way of going over to the target first. They were the first wave across, and they would drop markers on the target, so the main force could come through afterwards and see where those target marking were and was taking place. Our master bomber is a guy called Pimpernel, okay? Now, we have 3 methods of marking the target: Wanganui, Parramatta, and New Haven. Now, they are bizarre names, aren't they? And I thought, where have those names come from? And a little bit of research told me a very straightforward answer. The head of the Pathfinder force was a guy named Donald Bennett. He was Australian, born in Parramatta. His right-hand man was a New Zealander who was born in Wanganui, and the WAF who typed up all his orders in the corner, guess where she was born? New Haven. That's where the names came from. Why not? If you don't know what they are, you don't know what they are. So to give you an example, Wanganui was target marking when you've got no visibility, 10/10 cloud as they called it. So we're dropping sky markers at, say, 20,000 feet. They descend on a parachute, glow red or glow green, and these are called TIs, target indicators. And they would fall, and they would go down, and you would bomb, usually on the greens. Bomb on the greens, bomb on the greens. Now, our master bomber here, Pimpernel, he is responsible for making sure that you're all doing what you should be doing. He will be over the target for the entire raid. Now, radio silence was the order of the day. Do not communicate in any way, because the Germans can pick up on the radio signals. Poor master bomber, he's talking all the time. He's calling in the Pathfinder force if those markers are being blown off course. All the time this man is talking, saying, "Bomb on the greens, you're off target, you're off target." So he is the most important target to the Germans. They will try and get the master bomber. And for over an hour, this man is transmitting, putting himself at the most dangerous point. So we have a backup. Pimpernel 2, the deputy. and his responsibility is to take over if Master Bomber is shot down. Master Bomber, and remember when we first started pathfinding, they were flying in Lancasters. Beautiful, stable aircraft, but not the most manoeuvrable. Eventually we'll give them Mosquitoes, which had some manoeuvrability. But what a brave thing these guys did, master bombing. Absolutely incredible. And here we are, look. Controlled New Havens, what we're using tonight. That means controlled because it's controlled by the master bomber, and New Havens the method. So we think we're going to have some visibility tonight. Illuminating flares will be in the target area H6. Anybody guess what H6 means? H hour minus 6. So that's 6 minutes before you're over the target. That's where those flares are going to be. TIs, target indicators. And it clearly instructs you what's going to actually happen. Now after briefing, you're hoping that there's not going to be much of a delay before you're outside, getting your gear on, getting ready to go. Because the aircrew have told me that this was the worst time of all, because you've got time to think. And remember, you've not been before, so just imagining what's going through your minds, what you're thinking of at this point in time. What am I going to say? And everything else. Tea for you is an absolute delight. Real bacon, real eggs. No powdered eggs for you. Only one rasher, mind. Okay, don't want to get fat. One rasher. It's rationed, isn't it? But the least they can do is give you a hearty send-off. So a nice meal. And at that point, you'll be laughing and joking with your mates, trying to take the tension off. But you won't necessarily be being too friendly with the guys around you, because if you made friends with other crews and that crew got lost, you felt it. The less you can feel what is actually happening with these raids, the better for you. Now when you're going to get your kit on, you'll go to your individual locker, start putting your stuff on, you put your Lucky Charm in, okay, you must go in the left pocket. I never fly with my teddy in the right pocket. Maybe one of your socks is put on inside out. Incredibly superstitious, these guys, and they had a system and they stuck to that system, and if anything ruffled that system, it set them on edge, off target. Have you seen many photographs, I'm sure, of Bomber Command crews? Have you seen the ones where they look pensive and the ones where they look happy? I'll bet you the ones where they look happy were taken after a raid, and were usually after a tour. They finished a tour. The pensive ones, they were superstitious about having their photograph taken before a raid. You're tempting fate. Don't take a picture of us before the raid. Well, after you've got your gear on, you come out. Now we're going to get, hopefully, City of Lincoln over today. That beautiful, beautiful Lancaster will be across. But we know what it's like. We know how wonderful it is. Now just imagine 12, 14, 16 Lancasters, all fired up, all with each 4 Merlins fired and making that beautiful sound, taxiing out from their dispersals at the predetermined time and moving to runway 0220 that we're using tonight. Just imagine what the sights and smells were like of that we can never ever recreate. Outstanding. You taxi through, you will taxi to the edge of the runway, the direction you're going to fly. There'll be a control caravan there, a caravan with black and white checks, and he's got one of these, an Aldis lamp with a green filter on the front. Your pilot will quickly check in with the rest of the crew and say, everybody okay? Everybody happy? He will then stick his thumb up to the aircraft controller, who will flash a green single lamp signal to him, brakes off, and off you go down the runway. Now remember, 4 clockwise rotating propellers on a Lancaster bomber, which means the aircraft is constantly trying to turn. It's trying to pull itself off the runway, so you're fighting this with throttle and rudder to get off the runway. Now the all-up weight of a Lancaster, and there is a compromise, you could never have a full bomb load and a full fuel load. You could only have part of each, because your all-up weight is 31 tons. Now we've got 2,000 feet to get 31 tons off the ground. Just imagine. Anyway, you get off the ground, you're slightly higher, you head chop at the end of it, up comes your undercarriage, a quick blip on the brakes to stop those huge wheels from spinning, with all that airflow being released now because that huge weight of undercarriage is stopping the airflow. You now lurch forward a little bit and you will climb. And you'll orbit the airfield perhaps, or go a little bit further away in orbit. You may be formate with another squadron coming in who's going at roughly the same time as you, but you're gaining height all the time. You fly out across Skegness front if you're Lincolnshire based, and now you head out. 10 miles out, gunners test your guns. A quick blast on your guns to make sure your guns are working. It's cold up there, don't forget. But most importantly, you don't want to shoot anybody who's having a walk down the front at Skegness, do you? So they don't like it. okay? About 3/4 of an hour to an hour into your journey, enemy coast ahead, and that's when the flak starts. Who's experienced turbulence in a modern airliner? Yeah? Horrendous, isn't it? You can drop 3,000 feet sometimes. It can be absolutely awful. Well, this turbulence is being caused by bombs exploding outside of your aeroplane. They're trying to shoot you down. Remember how thick this aeroplane is? So an 88mm cannon shell, so we're talking that diameter, can punch its way through one side and punch its way through the other without hardly any notice to you, and you're just hoping it doesn't do something to you on its journey. And you need to remember that this is what we have in this turret, 303, a First World War rifle bullet. This is what the Germans are shooting at you with, 20mm exploding cannon shell. And that's just from the night fighters. We're not talking about anti-aircraft 88mm shells. And that's what's coming at you. You experience the flak all the way to the target. You're getting near the target now. Now the bomb aimers are ready. Bomb aimers on the bombing run. Bomb doors open. But this is another astonishing fact. You now have to fly for almost 2 minutes, absolutely straight and level, with a fixed altitude, a fixed speed, with your bomb doors open, exposing all that ordnance to the radar-controlled ground gunners below to drop your bombs. Well done, bomb aimers. You've dropped your bombs in the right place, at the right time, first time. And even better than that, the photo flash flare's gone down and you've took a picture of it with one of these cameras. Very important to take the picture of where your bombs have detonated. Because Bomber Command's rules were, if they couldn't see where you dropped your bombs, they didn't count this as a trip. So you'd have another trip to do. F-24 camera, very important, get the shot. So you've got your shot of that. You now want to get the heck out of there, and strangely you're hoping that the flak will continue all the way home. Because if the flak stops, that's when the night fighters are after you. And the night fighters, 20mm cannon shell. In fact, the night fighters have a special technique. And their technique is this. They will try and approach the aircraft unnoticed from behind and below you. They're hoping that you're relaxing because you've dropped your bombs, you're on the way home, you're thinking of getting home. Never relax. Keep that scanning going from that rear turret because they slip underneath you and they don't fire into your bomb bay because, of course, there's no point in that, you've got no bombs. What they do is they have two 20mm cannon shells mounted on the top of the fuselage. They then fly slightly starboard or slightly port and fire directly up into your fuel tanks. They felt this was quite chivalrous because what it meant was that hopefully your wings will catch fire, but it won't of course explode with the fuel vapour that is now gathering inside those tanks as they're emptying. And this would give you about 30 minutes to get out. So they felt it was chivalrous, it gave the crew time to disembark the vehicle, as they put it. Two of those straight into your fuel tanks. Well, luckily for you, no night fighter attack. You get through it, nice and safe, coming back, you're heading towards the coast, but your flight engineer and your pilot have been having a big discussion because you've been losing fuel from your number one tank on your starboard wing. It's the biggest tank in your starboard wing, 6 tanks altogether. He's been pumping fuel from that tank to the other tanks to try and conserve it, be drawing fuel to all your engines from the same tank, use it up before it goes out. And he's realised that it's going to be a close call. Have you got enough fuel to get back over the North Sea, to return home? Have you got enough fuel to get back? What a decision to have to make. The North Sea is a big black pond. You have 5 days of rations with your dinghy to float around in the North Sea before your desalination tablets have gone, before your fresh drinking water has gone, you're starting to hallucinate and potentially just walk out of your dinghy. Or do you bail out over enemy territory, cut your losses and try and get in the hands of the resistance to get you back home again? What a decision. Flight Eng says press on. So you're heading back now towards Britain and you can start to see the British coastline. And what you're looking for is anything you can recognise, because remember, blackout. We can't navigate with the town and city street lights. We've got to have total blackout and get back in. You may be looking for the 3 spires of Lincoln Cathedral just glowing in the moonlight to get you back in. But while you've been gone, the weather, as Britain always does, has turned. The fog has come down, drifted right across your airfield and closed it. So now you can't even land back at the airfield you took off from. So they divert you to an airfield like Metheringham, in Lincolnshire, where they have a brilliant system called FIDO, Fog Intensive Dispersal Operation. And I've got a little dummy of it here. This is what FIDO looks like. Not very exciting, I'm sure you agree. But this has saved so many crews' lives, because what they do with this is they have these 3 pipes all the way down one side of the runway, all the way down the other side of the runway, and this is how it works. At a pressure and a rate of 65,000 gallons an hour, fuel is pumped through this top pipe all the way along the runway line. It then flows down into the bottom 2 and seeps out of holes that are drilled every 2 inches along the base, along with fuel vapour. A very careful airman with a lit taper lights the fuel, and all of a sudden fire will stream right down the side of the runway, right down the other side of the runway, and burn off that low-lying moisture fog, and within 10 minutes you'll have a beautiful glide path straight into your home. Problem was, fire from this would be replaced by smoke. So the ingenious design of this system is that the fuel that's being pumped through here, before it goes into these pipes, is heated by the burners underneath, thus stopping it burning with smoke. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now, we laughed at the Met man, didn't we, at briefing? He was telling us a whole load of cobblers, frankly. He invented this, so he's now a hero. He gets his kudos back again. Met man invented this, the Type 4 FIDO. Brilliant. But hang on a second here. You're coming into land, you've got a leaking fuel tank, and you've got to land between 2 lines of burning flame. Brilliant. And let's hope that your undercarriage is stable, that's not been damaged. And not only that, another problem is, low on fuel, low on bombs, you're also light. So now you've got to land in between 2 lines of flame with hardly any weight at all, and fire, of course, creates heat, and heat creates lift, thermals. So you've almost got to crash land your aircraft down in the middle of this fire to get down. One aircrew member said to me, he said, all I can say, Sean, it was like landing between the gates of Hades. Astonishing. But you make it down. Well done, crew. First time back, FIDO landing. Brilliant. You taxi off, but still your night is not over, because now you have to be debriefed by the intelligence officers. They will take down every bit of information. Did you see any new flak emplacements, any night fighter work, anything going on that you think we should know about? They write it all down. You'll have a nice hot cup of tea with a tot of brandy in it, and by God you've earned it. And also, while you're there and debrief, the Padre will be there. Now, the Padre was there not to talk about Christianity. He's there as an unofficial counsellor. Maybe you've seen something you didn't want to see. Maybe you've lost a crew member. Crew member's been killed. And he'll talk you through it. And this comes to the most important part, I think, of this talk. And that is that these guys are my heroes, because now you've done it. Now you've been there, you've seen what it's like, you've experienced the hell that it can be. They had the determination, grit and courage to step back into that aircraft and go and do it again, on average, a further 29 times. A tour of duty, on average, 30 trips. Now, the American Air Force, the B-17, I take nothing away from the Americans. They were incredibly brave. They did daytime bombing. It was phenomenally dangerous, really, really dangerous, and many, many casualties. But the American government recognised this. So the American government said to them, have you all seen the film Memphis Belle? Yeah? Yeah? If you get through 25 operations of daylight bombing, I think you've done your bit. Your war is over, no matter how long it's taken to train you, now how much it's cost to train you, you can go home, back to your families and live the rest of your life. Bomber Command was slightly different. Bomber Command was a multinational force. Poles, Czechs, Rhodesians, Jamaicans, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders. It's a multinational force, all come to fight for one common cause. No, if you get through your tour of operations, you get 2 weeks leave. 2 weeks leave. After your 2 weeks leave, you get posted, split up, and posted to an OTU, an operational training unit, where you now experienced go and teach the new guys coming through. But unfortunately, you're teaching them, they don't know a great deal, and also, you're teaching them on withdrawn aircraft from operations. They're knackered. Many said it was more dangerous on OTU than it was on operations. You have 6 months of that, and then you come back to ops again after another 2 weeks leave. So if you're unlucky enough to be in the war early enough or lucky enough to survive, you could have done sometimes 90 trips. Average lifespan of a Lancaster bomber, 40 hours. 40 hours. Phenomenal. So we're almost at the conclusion of my talk. And what I want to say is this. I've bombarded you with all sorts of facts and figures and details and things like this. But I want you to all take them away. Try and remember just one thing of what I've said. And if any one of you say just one thing of what I've said, then that's my job done. Thank you ever so much for coming today. Thank you for listening to me, giving me your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you. If you want to ask any questions about anything or want to say anything, please come over and I'll tell you. Thanks.